Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Feiner, and on behalf of the HDR10 Plus Technologies LLC and the HTSA, my pleasure to welcome all of you to our latest workshop, the HDR10 ecosystem, and serve as your host for this event. Now, some of you may know this event was originally scheduled to take place at CEDIA Expo, because over the past few years, CEDIA Channel has witnessed a number of exciting new developments, created additional sources of revenue, custom integrators, and AV dealers alike. However, if you stop and think about it, none of these offer your customers a greater value proposition or a more meaningful impact on their home entertainment experience as ultra high definition, or UHD for short. UHD encompasses a number of key technology advancements, including, but not limited to, 4K or 8K resolution, wider color gamut, and higher frame rates, plus high dynamic range. And of all of these improvements, HDR is perhaps the most important. It directly affects the storytelling process and delivers the full range of creative's intent to entertainment enthusiasts everywhere. And as you'll learn shortly, the de facto standard for HDR is HDR10. And this HDR10 ecosystem is comprised of three critical elements: content, distribution, and of course, devices. During the next hour, we're going to conduct three different sessions that take a closer look at all of these and the key role they play in your business today. We've also reserved a little time to answer a few questions from you as well. So if you're interested in logging in, just click the Q&A button located on the right side of your screen. So now to get things started, we felt it was important to have a speaker who could provide you with a greater understanding about the HDR platform in general, and HDR10 and 10 Plus in particular. Pete Leday is a prominent engineering consultant in advanced imaging and sound. He currently serves as the CTO of Mission Rock Digital, a San Francisco-based firm specializing in next-gen media. Additionally, Pete may be familiar to some of you, since he's a past president of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers and a SMPTE Fellow. He also serves as chairman of IDEA, the Immersive Digital Experiences Alliance. So please welcome Pete Leday.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. It'd even be more a pleasure if we were able to be in person, but good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. And this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is how to make images better using high dynamic range. After that nice introduction, Mark, what I'd like to do is sort of cover a couple of topics in the next 15 minutes or so. Why is HDR important in the first place, including sort of a cinematic perspective? What do the storytellers think about this? There's some technical issues about how you get back and forth between photons and electrons that we need to touch on, and acknowledge that there's a diverse set of televisions that we need to be able to accommodate out there, and then I'll do a quick summary. So to start out, why is high dynamic range imaging important? Well, the answer is pretty simple, really. It's to do with that's how we see. The human vision system is really accommodated to be able to see a wide range of light levels, and we want to have our entertainment and display devices at least come close to matching those to the extent possible. You've probably seen a lot of charts like this before that represent the brightness that's perceivable by the human visual perception system, going down from a dark night sky up to full sunlight, going over 12 orders of magnitude. This is measured in candelas per square meter, or nits. As you're probably well aware, traditional standard dynamic range sets will cover only a small portion of that, maybe from 0.01 nits up to 100, 200 nits. But the new HDR compatible display devices are able to get down to as low as 0.001 nits or 1 millinits, and up to 1,000 or even higher, 3,000, 10,000 nits in the not too distant future. And that's much closer to what real life is. So that enables us to do things like look at a scene that we would find very natural in life and realize that we're able to now see details in the dark shadows that we weren't able to see before, because the HDR is able to accomplish those low black levels. But you're of course able to see the diffuse whites, which are sort of the typical white levels that one sees in virtually all scenes. But there's still room left over to bring those spectral highlights, maybe 10 times brighter than the diffuse white. And so the misperception sometimes is that, oh my gosh, I don't want a 3000 nit display, it'll blind me. Well, not at all, because even on a high dynamic range display, well-created content will have roughly the same average brightness. It won't change. What will be different is you'll be able to do some of those little sparkles and small points of light, just like in real life, that make it much more realistic and immersive. And this is what's been adopted from the cinematographic community. I mean, they've quickly really applauded the benefits of high dynamic range because it does bring you a much better mechanism for storytelling. Things like being able to use contrast and blowing out a window and showing the shadows in the same scene, being able to have the specular reflections that would otherwise be, very moot. And in the early days, people looked at scenes, like this and said, oh yeah, I could show the sun and I could show the shadows. That's really cool. But the cinematographic community, led by the American Society of Cinematographers, really wanted to learn more about how to use this in real life shoots. And this is not something new. It's really been going back more than 5 years. And back in 2017, there was a number of test shoots that were used to evaluate not just cameras, but lighting conditions and environments, post-production workflow, to really learn how to incorporate HDR into movies. And it resulted in creating a number of test scenes like this. And what you're seeing is a typical interior scene. And if you look carefully, you'll see that there's bright sunlight outside that's coming through. There's shadows under the table, and there's everything in between. There's bright reflections off shiny objects in the background. And the goal of the cinematographer is to be able to capture those all accurately. And so it was mapped out very methodically, where D, the flesh tones, are in this case set for 18% reflectance, or what's considered mid-gray. And I still have plenty of room to discern those shadow details at points A, B, and C. And I'm not clipping even when I get out to those very bright areas. So this is just one example of some of the test footage. And since then, there's been lots of good activities, a lot of good footage that's being shot. And what you'll notice, a lot of these things are done. Here's some examples from Netflix, where the cinematographer was specifically looking to not call out the flashiness of HDR. It's not to call attention to itself, but it's really to subtly incorporate scenes in ways that you wouldn't otherwise be able to see. Now, I realize that looking at our laptops and smartphones during a webinar doesn't give you the best perspective on this, but I think you get the idea of the range and brightness levels that are appropriate here. I think it's important. The cinematographer on this, Eric Messerschmidt, pointed out that he wants to create all the choices available to me so that when appropriate, I could saturate the color or I could blow out a window. Having the added range is to our benefit, but it's also the responsibility to use it to tell the story. And I think that's the key point here. It's not about making it noticeable, like you would notice if you go to Best Buy and say, oh, that's a really bright TV, I want to buy it. It's really the subtleties and nuances to be able to bring that full range. And the cinematography is but one part of it, because we also have to be able to consider the whole workflow or the ecosystem. Good news here is that this has also become very mature really over the last 10 years since the industry first started talking about HDR, ranging from shooting and principal photography via virtual effects into compositing and tone mapping and color grading, finishing. All those things are well established now, and there's very good tools out there. I want to point out notably among them is the Academy Color Encoding System, or ACES. This starts with input from the camera. You'll notice that there's that box says ACES Working Space. That's sort of a universal platform that allows you to create your lookup tables and color corrections and transforms, and then you output it to the appropriate output device using the output device transform. So this is being widely adopted as well in order to accommodate all the different display devices and be able to take input images from many, many sources. That kind of gets down to what's going on under the hood. And I like to think of this as how you convert photons to electrons and vice versa. And I think we're all very aware that in the digital world, you take an analog level. This is an example of going from a black to a white, higher luminance, going from left to right. And in digital, of course, you do that in stair steps. In this case, there's 8 steps, 0 to 7. So that's not very many. But since we're all geeks here, we want to say it's really in the binary system. And since it's in binary, we characterize that as a 3-bit encoding or quantization method. So I'm taking from my blackest black to the whitest white and encoded it in 3 bits. And we're going to ask ourselves the question, is that enough? And the answer, of course, is, well, no, it is not enough. 8 levels of brightness is nowhere near what the eye could see. Here's an example of a 5-bit encoding and then up to an 8-bit encoding. And without stealing thunder here, for HDR, you really need more than 8 bits. 8 bits has been very sufficient for standard dynamic range and is sort of on the edge, perhaps, for high dynamic range, but you want to really get rid of that banding. You don't want to be able to see the differences between one level and another, or really a code value. If you go from 0000 to 0001, you don't want to be able to see that as a band. You want to see it transparently as you in the bottom half of that screen. The way that you do that is considered or called the electro-optical transfer function. And actually there's an inverse, there's optoelectrical and then the electrical opto. So it's just, again, changing photons into electrons. You might think you just do that as a straight line. You double the number of photons, you double the electrons or the code value, but that doesn't work like that. That would be called linear, where everything is sequential. But we very early, back in the early days of ATS or NTSC, realized that that's not the way that eyes work. And what you want to do is have more bias towards the low black levels. The eye is much more sensitive to minor gradations in the low black grays than they are in the high brightness. And therefore, let's use our precious bits to be able to encode those in the most appropriate manner. So the black line here represents a typical gamma signal. And the red line is this new PQ encoding system that I'll be talking about. I do want to touch on another encoding method besides the PQ, which is called the hybrid log gamut, which also has some advantages in terms of it not being tied into a given set, but it's not been widely adopted for a number of reasons, and it's still a good method for the limited uses in which it's put. But the much more popular encoding method for an EOTF is called perceptual quantization. And here's a little graph going from bottom to top. You're going from 0 to 1,000 nits in this example. And left to right, I'm going from code value 0000 up to code value 1023, 10 bits. And what you should note is that 75% of my precious code values, or my encoded payload on my bit stream, is dedicated to levels below the 18% middle gray. So I'm really trying to focus on subtle gradations in the gray levels, not so much worry about the differences between bright whites. This has been encoded or memorialized as a standard at the SMPTE, ST2084, going back to 2014. It's widely used in many applications, starting out in some cinema applications and across television. But perceptual quantization has become very popular and is a core of the HDR10 standard. So let's summarize a bit here. First of all, in quantization, we need at least 10 bits of bit depth. 12 bits is even better, but 10 bits is good. And we need an electro-optical transfer function that properly assigns those code values to where I need them the most, which is biased towards the low black levels and not worry about the whites as much. However, all TVs are not the same. So when I send out my wonderful high dynamic range program, I'm going to find that it's hitting different people's television sets. And if I might reference for 1,000 nits in my studio, and I carefully color time it for that, and I might be going out to sets that are 650 nits or 300 nits or 3,000 nits. And I need to have a solution for that. And the solution is known as tone mapping. This is where I'm taking the gradations and luminance values, and I'm assigning those to what the display is capable of. And in order to know how to do that conversion, I'm using metadata. And there's a couple different flavors of metadata that's traveling along with my image, tell my display what to do with what I got here. The simplest, and that one that's widely adopted already in HDR10, is static metadata. And it really works very well. What it does is it looks at the overall color volume and it assigns numbers to the average light level, which is the brightest frame, and maximum light level, which is the brightest pixel in a given scene or program. And it encodes those so it tells the display what to do with the information that's coming along. This was also pinned down and memorialized in a standard called the SMPTE ST 2086 back in 2014. And it does include what's called MaxFall. Sometimes you'll hear that term, or MaxCLL, content light level. And those are used or not used at the discretion of content producers and studios. Some people have opinions that they're more useful than others, but it's an available technique out there. And but technology doesn't stand still. So in the course of developing the HDR10 Plus standard, in case you're wondering what the difference is, one of the big differences is the ability to support dynamic metadata. Now, in this case, I could be looking at every scene, scene by scene, and looking at what its luminance content is and assigning and instructing what my display should do best in order to accommodate it. So the way that works is that the luminance statistics are gathered during the mastering process. It's an automated process. It works quite well. It's adopted, it's well accepted by the filmmaking community. And the filmmakers do have the ability to create their own tweak on what those statistics are if they feel the need to do so. And it's looking at pixel counts in 9 different grayscale ranges, so it's not a crazy degree of detail. The statistics are used for customized tone mapping curves that are unique to every scene or every frame if you want, and the consumer devices will adjust accordingly based on what they're able to do with their luminance capabilities, which is similar to what HDR10 does, but on a scene-by-scene basis. Once again, this one was pinned down 5 years back at SMPTE as the ST 2094-40. And so this includes the dynamic metadata for color volume transform and provides the ability for the sets to be able to discern on a scene-by-scene basis what it needs to know. Now, the benefits obviously are the optimized tone mapping through dynamic metadata. So I'm really being able to pin down what the filmmaker intended scene by scene. It's a straightforward mastering process, so it doesn't require a crazy amount of work, and that's why people are using it. And it supports future-proof. It's 8K. We talked about 10 or 12-bit. This supports up to 16-bit quantization and 10,000 nit luminance display, which is part of PQ. And maybe best of all, it's an open standard, so you don't have to have a lot of IP encumbrances to make this work. Have people made it work? Well, yeah, there's been pretty good adoption for all of these standards under the HDR ecosystem. If we look at the TV makers in the US, you'll see in the big blue circle in the middle, HDR10, where it goes around there, that's covering virtually all the television set manufacturers that are out there that I know about. And HDR10 Plus picks up another 6 or 7 of some of the higher name brands that are already adopting that. And I think you'll see more uptake in terms of the HDR10 Plus as well. There's some other standards out there like Dolby Vision that are also supported, and the hybrid log gamma. But certainly HDR10 is the broad adoption right now, and it's wonderful to have the option of HDR10 Plus in certain of the sets. I think you'll see more of that. Now, if you look at what the video streaming services are doing, you'll see it's even more dramatic in that virtually everybody is supporting HDR10, with one exception, which is the BBC iPlayer. I should note that BBC was the inventor of hybrid log gamma, which is very good technology, and I applaud them for adopting it. But the other folks out there are seeing the benefits of HDR10 and more. I think we just added a couple to this chart, doing the HDR10 Plus, adding the capabilities for the dynamic metadata. Now, you might notice that ambient light also makes a big difference. That was one of the things that people realized in high dynamic range, is that, am I viewing this in a very dark room or in a sunlit porch? And that does have an effect. And the HDR10 folks have not forgotten about that and are now working on the HDR10 Plus Adaptive, which is an ability to look at the consumer viewing environment and adjust the tone mapping on a scene-by-scene basis to be able to accommodate the actual viewing conditions. So that kind of closes the loop on all the different variables that would affect the overall creative content that the producers are trying to create. So in summary, high dynamic range brings significant cinematographic or storytelling benefits. The encoding requires a pretty big upgrade from standard dynamic range because you can't get away with 8 bits and standard gamma anymore, but the technologies are there to do it. Tone mapping will allow you to accommodate a heterogeneous set of different consumer devices. You can have many different displays, all providing the optimized image according to what the creative intent of the content producers was. HDR10 Plus gets you 80 or 90% of the way there with static metadata, and HDR10 does. HDR10 Plus, by adding active metadata, makes it even more perfect on a scene-by-scene basis. There's a lot of early adoption, and it's adopting even more with the ambient light compensation being added. And that concludes this overview. Hope that wasn't too much information, but I'll turn it back to you, Mark, now.
Pete, that was great. Thank you. We've got a couple questions from our audience, if I can relay them to you and see what your response is. Given the fact we have a lot of AV dealers and integrators, one question we received is, there's been a lot of discussion and noise in the industry about the whole issue related to nits, and particularly in regards to the various types of display technologies between OLED and full backlit LCD. In your experience, how critical is the choice of display technology in terms of achieving a great experience in terms of HDR? And how widespread is the use of this in the production community between types of displays?
Great question. And, over the years, a few years ago, I would have said that, gosh, OLEDs look so much better than LCDs, but the display manufacturers don't sit quiet. So they've been coming up with amazing things in terms of zoned backlights on the LCDs. The OLEDs have gotten better. I'm really excited about micro LED. Samsung The Wall is one example. There's others. And those really do allow you the best of both worlds, much lower black levels by distinguishing the LEDs and much brighter. I think all of those are being applauded by the creative community. People want to see that. And I think that every year we're going to come back to the retailers and we're going to see even better improvements in all these different technologies for it. And what I would just say is that a few years ago, people were saying, oh, 300-400 nits is more than enough. Anything more than that will blind you. But I've seen excellent examples of 10,000 nit displays with properly graded content, which are extraordinarily wonderful because they really do show you that difference between the bright whites. So I wouldn't dismiss high luminance peak levels when used properly.
Okay. And speaking of grading and the whole HDR process, we have another question from someone in the audience about how widespread is the availability of HDR rendering in the various suites and stations in the creative community today? Is it an everyday practice, or is it still something that is being slowly rolled out and introduced?
I'd say it is an everyday practice in the higher end scripted episodic world. Also, there's some sports broadcasters that have been adopting it. The low end, is still in industrial videos and local videos are not necessarily going to have that. But I don't think you'd find a post suite in Hollywood that's doing anything for widespread broadcast or cinematic release or any of the streaming services that's not very adept at HDR now.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about the services and an update on that as you referenced in a moment. Pete, that's it. It's been great. We really appreciate such an informative presentation. And one last question. We had a question from the audience regarding access to your PowerPoint presentation. Are any of these slides available either directly through you or your company?
Yeah, we can make that happen, and I'll figure out how to get that communicated out with you, Mark. But I'm very welcome to share those.
That would be great, and we'll follow up with these people independently. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate all the time and effort on it.
Pleasure.
All right. So we've heard a very thorough presentation and background on the whole HDR platform. As impressive as HDR technology is, it's also important for all of you to know how these content companies are working in HDR and how they're focusing on completing the overall experience for their customers. Without compelling content, none of this is worth our time and effort to support it in the industry. So I want to take a moment to open my PowerPoint deck and to take a closer look at some of the issues related to HDR production and distribution as far as the business is concerned. And basically, as a level setting procedure, there's a wide variety of HDR content available today from a variety of different sources, including, as you can see, from the latest motion pictures all the way down to live sporting events. And most importantly, again, your customers are more aware of this each and every day as far as their choice in programming and viewing. In fact, over the last few months alone, nearly 20 million consumers are able to experience their sports, such as the Major League All-Star Game and the Tokyo Olympics, live in HDR from a variety of different distribution platforms. HDR10 content is also available from a variety of other platforms that are available to consumers, including Ultra HD Blu-ray, your choice of cable, fiber, and satellite distribution, digital downloads from companies like Kaleidoscape, and of course, a wide variety of streaming services. And these streaming services are being marketed using a number of different video-on-demand businesses. It becomes such a wide choice that it's becoming important for consumers to understand the value proposition with each and every one. Imagine there's subscription VOD, ad-supported VOD, there's transactional VOD from an ownership standpoint, and even premium VOD with a different availability model. Plus, there's many other hybrid models of all of these. And as you would expect, there is research in the market today that shows that consumers are becoming more and more confused by all of this. Of course, the 800-pound gorilla in the industry today is Netflix, who, according to Variety, has become the single most influential company in the history of the film business. Think about this. In such a short period of time, Netflix has changed everything. And in a copycat industry like Hollywood and television, we now have a wide number of direct-to-consumer competitors who have merged in the marketplace. They have one thing in common. They all use HDR10 as the baseline format for their various entertainment options. For example, Amazon Prime has over 140 million subscribers in the US alone. And according to their video specialist, Ben Wagoner, all of their content has been released in HDR10 and has HDR10 plus metadata available as well. There's also Hulu, third most popular streaming platform. According to Alex Zambelli, their product manager, most of their titles are now streamed in HDR, and every single one of these is available in both HDR10 plus and Dolby Vision. Vendors YouTube, with over 100 million viewers each month. They watch everything from movies and TV shows to their own user-generated content in HDR. According to Angela Wheeler, their lead engineer, YouTube utilizes HDR10 plus dynamic metadata to provide the highest quality viewing experience on a scene-by-scene basis. All of this is critical because of the need to reach out to end users and support them on this. And this means that HDR10 has created a number of opportunities for the custom integration community, whether it's explaining the differences in benefits in physical or digital media, or understanding the new business models that I just referenced below, or teaching consumers the best ways to search and discover content. All of this support can be easily monetized by you while delivering the best user experience to your customers. So as you can see, the HDR10 ecosystem is a very robust one. And in addition to compelling content and new distribution platforms, there's also a number of exciting new televisions and projectors that are available as well to support this. So to tell you more about this and some of the key issues related to all of this, it's my pleasure to introduce some well-known industry executives. From top left, we have Rob Buddy, who's the National Product Manager for DLA Products at JVC Kenwood, USA. Lower right corner, directly in the center, is Bill Mandel, the VP of Industry Relations for Samsung Research of America. And last, but certainly not least, on a webinar such as this, we have Tom Doherty, who's the Director for New Technology Initiatives at the Home Technology Specialists of America. Thank you guys for joining us on this today. So I'd like to start with the basics on product availability, and I want to address the first question to Bill. Bill, your company, Samsung, is a leading manufacturer of premium televisions, and you have a wide range of models that include HDR10 plus capability. Which of these products are specifically targeted to the CI channel?
Well, the CI channel, usually the higher end products, such as the QLED lineups, will have either the exact TVs specified for that channel, or they'll be slightly modified, like a B2B version of those that's sold through our SCA channel.
Rob, last month JVC introduced in the CD Expo timeframe 3 new projectors, which are the first in the industry to comply with the HDR10 Plus specifications. Can you give us a brief overview on these and the benefits specifically of HDR10 Plus metadata in the home theater viewing experience?
Yeah, we're proud to introduce 3 new laser models that have 8K and 4K 120 hertz capability. These projectors are great. We're kind of known for our native contrast. So we have over 100,001 native contrast in the projector with 32-point gamma. So with that, you can really plot the HDR gamma curves exactly without clipping or losing anything. With the long laser life and the brightness increase, these are ideal for HDR applications. And with the new frame adapter HDR10 Plus mode, we can actually reproduce whatever film is out there right now, the way it was intended to be shown. So.
And that frame adapt mode also supports dynamic tone mapping that Pete was referring to before.
Correct. So it's a dynamic tone mapping proprietary of JVC. So actually it doesn't rely on any metadata. It analyzes each frame or scene by scene and provides the proper tone mapping in real time. So the customer doesn't have to change modes or anything or change a setting. It will change automatically to the preferred display settings.
Okay. One other key device question I'm going to direct this to Bill. You also work very closely with the HDR10 Plus Technologies LLC. What other companies, in addition to Samsung and JVC, are providing currently HDR10 Plus compatible products?
There's a number of different TV makers that are providing products now. Most recently announced, I think, was TCL with the Android TV lineup. Has them. Several lines of Vizio TVs for a few years, and others around the world.
And in regards to other types of products beyond TVs themselves, what types and what brands of connected devices that can support HDR are also available in the marketplace today?
Yeah, there's quite a list of the connected devices. All the popular ones now are supporting HDR10 Plus and the various services using HDR10 Plus. So there's the Chromecast, all the recent Roku, since Roku OS 10, their 4K UHD devices, and then the Amazon Fire Stick, Fire Cube lineup of streaming devices. So those will all cover, play out Hulu and Paramount and Amazon and YouTube in HDR10 Plus easily.
So Tom, armed with all this information about HDR10 Plus products, what sell-up opportunities does this provide to AV dealers and custom integrators that are members of HDSA and other organizations?
Well, the new technologies like HDR10 Plus specifically provide an opportunity for the member or the integrator to really bone up on this technology and to understand what Pete presented and be able to communicate that in a manner that their customers can understand. Just further differentiates the dealer as a true professional. And the upsell opportunities are clearly the higher end televisions. You have credibility, so you're able to present higher performance products and make that sale. But also, it provides an opportunity to review the whole signal path that the client system is and make sure that they have HDMI 2.2 signal path and cables and such, or to make sure that the design that they've engineered for the installation that they're doing have the proper signal path from the correct AVR receiver, all the components that you're connecting for that client to benefit from that wow demo that you did for them.
Right. So in essence, this is only the beginning, and once this content-related experience is in place, regardless of your source for that content, it opens up a whole new range of opportunities for the CI integrators.
Yes, very much so.
All right, so I want to move the discussion now into some potential pain points and challenges we face day-to-day basis in the industry. Pete mentioned before there are a number of HDR formats on the market today. So I'd like to ask all of you, how is the industry doing, our industry, the CE industry, when it comes to promoting the benefits of HDR in general in a consistent way while avoiding the confusion between these various formats? And Tom, maybe start with you, since you're so close to the channel.
I think that there is improved awareness from the customer because they are seeing, at least the ones that are paying attention, the ones that have bought higher end product, if they've worked with an integrator, they've made them aware of it. But I think more can be done. And, I'm wondering out loud, it's one thing for the industry. When we say the industry, I think we're talking about the consumer electronic manufacturers and OEMs. But I don't think that this can be achieved just by themselves. I would like to see an enhanced collaboration between them and the content providers. I mean, to the extent that the manufacturers are, using these platforms to promote their products, it would be great to see on the other end more collaborative efforts by the content providers to underline the benefits of the fact that you can watch Knives Out and you can see it in either 4K, UHD, or not, and it's not that obvious to the customer, why to do that or to make that choice. Right. And so I'd like to see more education from the content providers through prodding by the manufacturers.
Come back to the content provider question because it's a critical one in a moment, but I want to ask the same question to both Rob and Bill. Rob, at JVC, what have you been doing on the education side to both clarify the value proposition and send a more consistent message about HDR in general?
With our sales force, we've been going out and doing trainings to the dealers on the importance of HDR, how to implement it through their entire system. Because there's a lot of chains in the command that need to be set up for this technically to work. So it's important that the dealers understand about, HDMI cabling, AVRs, internet bandwidth. It always comes down to bandwidth with this. So it's important to train the dealer on what they're going to see, what the sources are, and how they convey that to their customers. Because the customers don't know. They're just saying, I want to turn on the TV and watch something, and it needs to look good. But they don't understand Dolby Vision, HDR10 Plus, HDR10. It's all, foreign language to them. So, the dealers need to educate them, and we need to educate the dealers. But, I think it's important from the marketing side, from the providers to kind of teach the end user on what they want to look for in a movie. And I think that's important too, is getting the word out there. I mean, we can only do so much, but marketing is very important.
So moving that thought into the question for Bill, and it's a two-part question for you, Bill. First, from Samsung's standpoint, what has Samsung done in general to aid in education and clarifying the benefits of this to its dealers?
Yeah, well, Samsung definitely promotes HDR in the description of the displays. It's one of the top 4 or 5 features that we know customers request, and so it's very prominent in our website and pages in terms of the feature list. One thing that the LLC also has done is the displays out there using HDR10 Plus, they're doing a pretty good job now of putting up a pop-up that says HDR or HDR10 Plus, and that's starting to educate the consumers. But HDR is such a different format. It really should be treated as big of a revolution as introducing color in the first place. And I think that still kind of needs to be done. Like when I can't even tell, frankly, when you watch a show if it's in 4K because there's no lead-in that says this this show is presented in 4K UHD. And that was done for a long time with introduction of color. What I can tell now is when you watch a show, particularly on Amazon, the Amazon logo looks strikingly different in HDR. And so it's like, I know, it's like, oh, good, this show's in HDR. I can tell right away as a consumer.
I want to take that point of reference you left with the LLC, go back to Tom's point about content. How can we promote and engage the content community more effectively on it? And I want to start with Tom. HTSA is a leading buying group. If you had the wherewithal within your association or other associations like it in the industry, what marketing demonstration tools, content-wise, would your members need or could they use in order to generate more awareness about HDR10 and 10 Plus in general?
Well, when I think about historically some of the other significant introductions with technology through the whole home theater revolution of the last 30 years, a pretty substantial one related to sound was THX. And when THX was introduced, as an Uber version of Dolby surround sound, THX produced a product, and I'm dating myself here, and it was on Laserdisc format, but it was called the Wow Disc. And that had clips of movies and content that really emphasized, the audio quality, and it was quite engaging. And I am certain that every integrator that's tuned in here that was selling home theaters in the 90s, that they used the Wow Disc, and the Wow Disc converted a lot of sales. So
Right.
to the extent that either through new media, whether it's a private YouTube channel that we can have running in our stores or something that we can download and put on a USB stick, something that's kind of curated and put together that is produced in a way that is compelling and can at the same time educate, I think that that would be useful. Maybe we can have Pete Bluday's slide presentation kind of as one of the chapters. But I think something that makes it really simple to convey to not only the salesperson on the floor, but also to the client, and additional things in there that help clients be able to identify when they're cruising through Netflix or Amazon to, hey, pay attention, look for this bug, look for this logo, seek out when you're going to take time to watch a movie, seek out if there's alternate means. So I think something following that kind of recipe of the Wow Disc could serve the industry.
And if we were to bring the forces together to try to accomplish this, I think it's important to reference something you said at a recent HTSA summit. We're talking about end users and clients, what's important to them. You stated customers want things to be easy as part of the new entertainment landscape. So if we provide access to this, whether in store or on their own products in their home, this has to be something easy to activate and understand the benefits of. Is that correct?
In this day and age, the easier the better.
All right. I want to now turn to another content-related question that affects all of you directly, and of course, the end users going forward. I referenced before the amount of decisions and issues that are facing end users, the hottest category for content distribution in the industry, which is direct-to-consumer streaming. Talked about all the various offerings, the various business models, various needs to navigate through this new experience. I'd like to know your opinions on, is this something that you agree is monetizable by custom integrators and dealers in their role as trusted advisors to their customers? Tom, I'll start with you, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would be helpful for the LLC, the content providers themselves, the manufacturers to kind of distill, what are all the different options. And absolutely, when an integrator sells a system, a big part of the value proposition is that in-home training that all of us do after the system's been commissioned. And I think that within the proposal and within that commissioning structure can be included, the option of, hey, we can show you how to use your system. Another option would be to spend an hour or two training you on, helping you select Netflix, Amazon Prime, this, that, or the other, or why to subscribe to all of them or none of them or some of them. But, clearly we could charge for consultations on how to navigate and get the best performance out of the products that we delivered or the system we delivered.
So as long as you're provided and your members and dealers and integrators are provided this information from trusted sources like the 10 Plus LLC or other groups in the industry, it is something that customers would be willing to pay for to give them a better, more effective experience.
Yes, and also, the dealer wants it easy too, so we kind of need this served to us on a silver platter. I mean, you're expecting us to research that and figure that out. I mean, some of us are going to do that, but I think more people, if you can serve that up and productize, if the LLC can productize this offering, then this is something that the integrator could sell and charge for.
And Bill, is this something the LLC could help lead in terms of getting this type of information out there from either your own sources directly or from industry partners like the D&G and other organizations?
Yeah, that's what we try to do already. On our website, we do have a partnership page where we try to list different devices and content and other parts of the ecosystem. So we can look at trying to maybe expand that out or provide some template that Tom's members can use. We recently did make a sizzle reel that we've been providing to TV makers, and it's actually pretty good. It's like about a 2-minute trailer, and it has a lot of swipes in it showing benefit of HDR and HDR10 Plus, and we'll get that over to you. We can send that over actually, and it's unrestricted use.
Right. And Rob, I assume the JVC could use something like this as well, since you're actually pioneering a whole new category in HDR10 Plus compatible projectors.
Yeah, I mean, with the JVC projectors, if we used any of the formats, then getting the customer aligned to what's going to look best on his display, I think would be beneficial for the dealers and the end user.
Good. All right, we've got some questions. I have 2 questions I received here from our audience, and I want to direct it. This first one is for both Bill and Rob. How simple is HDR10 Plus to license and implement for devices compared to other dynamic metadata formats like Dolby Vision? Bill, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think both Rob and I can answer this from kind of different perspectives. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So it's essentially an open spec, but Samsung's gone and made our particular IP that we used in our TVs available to SoC makers. Panasonic has developed their own IP, for example, and that's what you find in their televisions and some of their partners. And so we've made it easy to get the technology out there and to have no cost for it. And then we have a certification program. There's 8 test centers around the world that have to test the devices, and Rob's projector would have been through one of those. I want to say maybe it was in Japan. And,
yeah, it was in Japan.
And that's it. And then once it's approved, you're allowed to make some different derivative products that are reasonably close to the original one. So we try to make it fairly straightforward for the adopters. And Rob, I guess you should talk about, if you can, whatever you want, but how much effort it took to get your device certified.
It was actually pretty easy. Our factory team worked on that in Japan, so they were able to test, certify, file all the paperwork very smoothly with really not any trouble at all. And so, I think with the projector's display and contrast and everything, that it was an easy thing to do. So.
Yeah, I was actually really happy. I didn't know you were going to talk about like your 32-point curve that's in these projectors, and that's super important because we have a test called a no clipping test. It's one of the certification things. It's brutal. You really have to show that you're doing good tone curve, or you can't pass that test. And you pass it, of course, because you have the right tech to do it.
If he wouldn't have passed it, and then it would have been clipping, would have been 15 yards penalty.
Yeah, we wouldn't. It would be an HDR. I don't know what kind of projector it would be, so not go there.
I
Sorry,
figured
Mark.
would go on the
OPI.
side on that question. We have one last question from the audience, and it's directed to Rob. Given this new category of projectors with HDR10 Plus compatibility and dynamic tone mapping, what type of screen materials and ambient light conditions and other types of recommendations do you have for use with your new projectors?
Well, that's a great question because we actually have a mode in the projectors called Theater Optimizer. So it takes in consideration the screen gain, the throw distance, and it all optimizes that for the correct brightness for that display. So there's different screen materials out there. It really depends on your viewing environment. For a dedicated theater, you know, a standard 1.0 gain white to maybe a 1.3 gain is kind of ideal. So you really have to look at how big your image you want to do. But with the higher lumen output, with 3,000 lumens, I don't think that's going to be a problem doing HDR on almost any type of screen. So.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a great session. I've gone through all the questions that I have and from our audience. I want to thank you for your time and participating. I'm just going to wrap this up right now for everyone who is on the webinar with us. So over the course of this last hour, we've tried to cover the key aspects of the HDR10 ecosystem in detail. Content production and distribution platforms to all of the latest compatible devices. We hope you found this to be both informative and productive for your time. But I want to stress that like most things in our industry, the rollout of HDR is a complex one. It takes a lot of time, and there's a number of technology and marketing challenges that have to be met and resolved before this can be successfully completed. But fortunately, as I think you've learned today, there's a number of people and companies that are involved with providing the solutions for these challenges, and by extension, creating great opportunities for all of you as dealers and integrators as well. So thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of your day.